Welcome back to Fireside Giants with your boy Alex. Today, Anthony, off in London eating fish and chips, but I'm here to talk about the quarterback situation and kind of an interesting take that Anthony and I have been discussing recently in that adding Russell Wilson, adding Jameis Winston, and then adding Jackson Dart is kind of an overkill. And I think the Giants had an underkill last year, obviously, with Daniel Jones and Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito. Now they have more talent that they know what to do with. And I think that actually gives them a lot of leverage to recoup some assets. And Anthony agrees in this context as well to maybe add a late round draft pick from one of these quarterbacks they could trade. Obviously, Dart's going to be sitting for a whole season. But I think in a perfect world, Dart is your QB2. If anything happens to Russell Wilson, Dart gets thrown in there. He's able to compete. He's able to be part of the process, get some reps. I don't think it's entirely necessary. They want him sitting, learning, and kind of capturing the entire offense before taking over as the primary starter in 2026. But they have a little bit of wiggle room now. They have some opportunity here. And I think one of the more interesting discussions is, could they end up leveraging one of these quarterbacks? I think in this instance, it's going to be Jameis Winston as a trade piece at some point this season. Now, they signed Winston to a 2-year deal. Most of that money, though, it's like basically a 2-year, $8 million deal, which means $4 million per season. And I know there's a lot of incentives built in. It could reach up to $16 million, so double the contract based on playing time. But signing Russell Wilson doesn't give Jameis Winston much of an opportunity to actually play. And I think that's where the Giants end up with some value, because Jameis Winston is a solid backup quarterback. And at that price, they paid him like a backup. He's going to be a backup. But maybe another team needs a quarterback and they want to be somewhat competitive, or somebody goes down and they need a couple of weeks of stability. And the Giants have the perfect guy to trade if need be. There's no trade clause in this deal. They can easily move him if they want to. And at the trade deadline, you're already kind of figuring out where your team is going in the 2025 season. You kind of know where you are, where you stand, how competitive you're going to be. Obviously, I think it's around week 8 or 9. So, you still have about 10 weeks left of the year, at least 9 weeks. And the Giants will kind of know where they're headed. So I think that gives them a little bit of information regarding, okay, can we leverage Winston now? What can we get back in return? It's going to be like a 6th rounder, right? You're looking at a late round draft pick, maybe a pick swap, maybe, you give up a 5th and you get like their 4th. I don't know, something like that. Winston and a 5th for a 4th rounder, like something like that could work or make sense. And, that level of stability, the Giants having that much talent at the quarterback position gives them options, gives them assets to utilize. And I think that Winston is going to be sitting mostly. Russell Wilson brings so much to this offense. I've said it 100 times, right? Adding Scattaboo, adding, more offensive line depth. Obviously, the defense should theoretically give the ball back to the offense a significant amount. The pass rush and the secondary investments. I just wrote an article, $99.2 million invested in Javon Holland and Paulson Adebo combined. And I love those contracts, guys. If you haven't looked at the contracts, oh my God. Like, Joe Shane knocked it out of the park with those deals. Paulson Adebo's deal, they have an out after the second season at like $5 million in dead money. Javon Holland out after the second season, $4 million in dead money. They did such a good job building those contracts. And I think long term, you kind of find yourself in a spot where this team is going to have a nice, healthy blend of youth, a nice, healthy blend of veteran talent. And then you look at the offensive side, and Russell Wilson's head and shoulders. Yeah, is he an average quarterback at this stage in his career at 36? Yeah, probably. But average is like leaps and bounds from what we've seen over the past couple of years. And Daniel Jones, I really sometimes forget just how bad it was at times. I think a lot of people like, oh, there was upside. He was okay sometimes. He was below average for years, and it wasn't even remotely close. He was a torturous experiment for us fans. Really put us through the darkest stages of this team. Felt like a medieval torture chamber watching Daniel Jones every Sunday. In that Houston game early in preseason set the tone. That pick 6, we're like, oh, same guy, same Daniel Jones. Well, what do you know? It was the same situation. He ends up being cut, halfway through the year. So Russell Wilson, though, is a breath of fresh air. He is one of the best, if not the best, deep ball thrower in the game, right? His I think he was like a 42% completion rate, something around there when it comes to 20-plus yards downfield. He was excellent. The guy has one of the best deep balls ever. That's well documented. Malik Neighbors, Darius Slayton, Jalen Hyatt, Brian Dable's going to be able to run the offense he finally has been trying to build for years, for 3 seasons now. He hasn't had the quarterback to actually execute the offense he wanted to run. Russell Wilson's going to give you that. Barring an injury where Winston has to play, if you get to the trade deadline and the Giants are sitting there and Russell Wilson is healthy, they feel like Jackson Dart is taking some really nice steps forward behind the scenes. He's learning and grasping the offensive system, and he's showing it in practice. Jameis Winston will be traded, and it will be a great move. You basically signed a guy to a 2-year deal, minimal guaranteed money. They can move on after the first season if they need to, and they can recoup a late round draft pick. Maybe, like I said before, you could package a 5th and Jameis Winston, get a 4th rounder in return. That's extremely valuable. The Giants got Cam Scatterbo in the 4th round this year. They got Marcus Bowe in the 5th round this year. You just never know what those draft picks are going to look like for you. So, if I'm Big Blue, if I'm Joe Schoen, now you have some pieces. You could consider Jameis Winston a conditional pick. You know what I mean? You could literally look at him and say, we gave a little bit of money to him, and he ends up being a conditional pick, or a compensatory pick, if you will. So, that's kind of how I would look at Jameis Winston, as a compensatory pick for the Giants, an opportunity to get one at the very least. Even if they don't trade him, he's an opportunity to get one. And if they do trade him, you get one. So even better. I feel like Joe Schoen, this offseason entirely for the Giants has been 3 years of learning consequences to put together a better strategy, to put together a more sound game plan here. Joe Schoen, at the very least, and I think a lot of you guys agree on our live streams, has learned from his mistakes in a lot of ways. The quarterback situation, Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, never again. And he clearly knows it. You cannot go into a season with that type of talent and expect to be competitive. Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, Jackson Dart, it is a night and day comparison compared to what we had. So he overkilled the quarterback position this year with what he had, and it was the plan C after all. They wanted Matt Stafford, they wanted Rodgers. Strike 1, strike 2, and strike 3, they went and got Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. It was their last shot at hope. It was their last opportunity. They pulled it out of the hat, and we actually ended up being pretty happy with the results there. So now they have to prove it, because there's still a lot left to do. But I think the Giants find themselves in a pretty advantageous position. Their defense, on paper, barring a Shane Bowen duty class, should be one of the best in football, right? They should be. Abdul Carter and Darius Alexander add 2 elements to this defense they desperately needed. A pure, raw, elite pass rush prospect who could be a top 5 pass rusher in football if he reaches his potential. He's 20 years old, right? 20 years old, 21 years old. It's stupid young. Darius Alexander's a bit older at 24, but he is a grown man. He is fully ready to be an impact defensive tackle alongside Dexter Lawrence on day one. He's going to help stop the run at a high level, and he's got some underrated pass rush tendencies. And I think, Andre Patterson, our DL coach, and then Dexter Lawrence, like, these guys are going to have a big play in helping him, and a big say and a big role in helping him develop on the job. So I'm pretty excited about the defense. The secondary should be exponentially better. I know Anthony and I are in agreement. We see a big bounce back year for Deonte Banks. Having that veteran leadership from Paulson Adebo, having that veteran leadership from Javon Holland, really, really critical variables in his development and growth. So I'm pretty ecstatic about the secondary and the improvements they made there. I love Tyler Nubin in the strong safety role. He was excellent against the run last year. They now have a ball hawking free safety in Javon Holland. Really excited about that. So the secondary should help the defensive line. The defensive line should help the secondary, and the defense should help the offense. So I'm expecting a lot more results. And look, Winston is not a bad player, and I think he's probably one of the best backups in football, if we're being quite honest with you. 31 years old. He's still young by a quarterback's, kind of perspective. And I always forget he was the first overall pick. Crazy. 2015, years ago. But last year, he had 2,121 yards, 13 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions with a 61.1% completion rate. Yeah, he's always been erratic. That's never been, something that we aren't aware of. Like, he definitely takes chances. He's had a 71% adjusted completion percentage. Turnover-worthy play percentage was 5.2%. Like, this guy is going to be erratic. He's going to be a player that 1 week, I'll give you an example. 1 week he'll go 146 yards passing with 3 interceptions, like he did in week 15 against the Kansas City Chiefs. Another week he'll go 497 yards for 4 touchdowns and 3 interceptions against the Denver Broncos, one of the best defenses in football. This is just the Jameis Winston experiment. Russell Wilson gives you more stability. Jackson gives you more hope and upside and youth. And Jameis Winston gives you, damn, he's playing, but on any given day, he could throw for 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. So it's not a bad backup, right? Drew Lock also has that tendency, just a lot less frequent. Drew Lock did it last year against the Colts, screwed us out of Cam Ward, and we're still happy with what happened in terms of the draft class. I mean, I think if you were to tell us we would end up with this class right now, we'd be like, yeah, that's pretty good it's a pretty good alternative if we're going to miss out on Cam. So I think we're happy right now, regardless of what happened. But Jameis Winston, at least as a backup, any given day could give you a masterclass offensive performance. And that's rare for a guy, and look, Daniel Jones just got $14 million per season, right? I think a 1 year, $14 million deal. Winston got 2 years, $8 million. That's only $4 million per season. I mean, there's a good argument to make Winston's better than Daniel Jones. So kind of crazy. It's just based on youth, based on upside. I'm sure a lot of teams wanted Daniel Jones because of that upside, that youth and mobility. They wanted to push Anthony Richardson. Very interesting. But Winston is a wild card. Winston is a flyer. Winston is an asset, to be quite honest with you. And it's never a bad idea to stash a lot of talent at one of the most important positions in sports, at the most important position in football. You have an embarrassment of riches at quarterback. Not that the Giants have an all-star quarterback or a Pro Bowl quarterback. They don't. I'm not going to write it off for Wilson. You never know. But, they don't have Patty Mahomes. They don't have Josh Allen, but they have an embarrassment of good, not great talent at quarterback. And I think that's pretty valuable, especially in terms of a trade opportunity where you could leverage it. Now, teams like the Saints, what happens if the Saints, they don't even have a quarterback really right now. So like what happens if the Saints are sitting there like, well, we kind of need help and we're really embarrassing right now. The regime, they're trying to be competitive. What happens, if another team, something happens and, they just need anyone to step in and be volatile, like be a hero. And, one day in the next, he loses you a football game because he's a backup quarterback, and that's what they're being paid to do. Win or lose, you're hoping to pray into or fall into a great situation. So, I do think that Winston gives you value. He is an asset, and he probably will be traded. I wouldn't say probably. I'd say 50-50 right now that he ends up being traded, which is totally fine. Like the Giants walk away with more value. It's basically a compensatory pick if you want to go in that direction. And I think that's more than reasonable. So, just wanted to get that off of our chest. Anthony in the same boat as I am. Winston is a trade piece for the Giants. The Giants have depth for once. How long has it been since we've had depth on this team? How long has it been since we've been able to sit here and pretend, not even pretend, like act like we have a solid string, first string, second string, third string of pieces. And I want to float this concept out for you. Jameis Winston isn't just a trade piece. He is a buffer for Jackson Dart. If something happens to Russell Wilson, the Giants don't want Dart to be forced into playing. They want him to sit. They want him to learn. They want to give him a year. So even if they don't feel Jameis Winston is a trade asset, at the very least, he's a kind of security blanket for Jackson Dart, so he's not forced into a position that he is not ready for. Because guys, he is not ready. He's not ready. That's the why he's a 25th overall pick. Do I like Jackson Dart? 100%. Do I like his attributes? Absolutely. But he needs to learn an NFL offense. Lane Kiffin's offense at Ole Miss is not an NFL offense. It is predicated on playing one half of the field, first reads, quick throws, the deep ball, scheming receivers open. It's just what he does. So I do think that Jackson Dart fell into a really good situation where you get to learn from Russell Wilson, which is awesome to begin with. And if something happens to Russell Wilson, you're not thrown into the fire when you're not ready. You know what I mean? You have Jameis Winston as that security blanket. So, I'm pretty optimistic about what the Giants have done and what Joe Schoen has done to rebuild this team. And I really kind of view this as the first year of a rebuild in a lot of ways. They got out from underneath Dave Gettleman's bad contracts. They finally got rid of Daniel Jones after doubling down on him for whatever reason. Obviously in hindsight, it's 50-50 or it's 2020. But at the moment, we were like, let's see what happens. They should have obviously done things differently. But, now we get to react and learn from that mistake. And I'm happy that Joe Schoen has learned from that mistake. It's not our job to lead the Giants, not our job to make the decisions, just our job to react to them as fans. And in Anthony and I's case, content creators. So, when you're looking at what Joe has done this offseason, he's built on paper one of the best defenses in the NFL. On paper, has one of the deepest quarterback rooms in the league. And you have a young player in Dart who has upside to be something special. You have to let him get there. On paper, you have a really exciting young running back room with Scadaboo and, of course, Tyrone Tracy. You have one of the best, receivers in Malik Neighbors. And you add a lot of upside on the offensive line. Marcus Bowe is really intriguing. So we'll see how things go. Obviously, it comes down to coaching. Players, awesome. Names, great. Upside, sure. It comes down to the coaching. It comes down to the development and the positions the Giants really put their players in to succeed. That is going to be what's the difference between winning and losing is for this team long term. But as always, my friends, happy to get your opinions on the Jameis Winston discussion. Do you think he's a trade piece? Do you think he could be leveraged in that way? I kind of view him as if you want to go down this route, a compensatory pick, a late round one at the very least. That's fine. You could always use those to package up and move forward. So really, and if they don't trade him, he's a great insurance policy to have him behind Russell Wilson to protect Jackson Dart and his development and growth long term. So really excited to hear your thoughts down below in the YouTube comment section. Make sure you drop a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify, like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you guys on the next Fireside Giants episode.